Well, we have another watercolor request. Um, this one wants to know, oh, it was referring to quick tips, three of them really. We've done three quick tips around the particular topic of clouds. And this one, quick tip 85 and 220 and 453, in case you're interested in watching those. The person wants me to show the same thing in watercolor. These were cumulus clouds. All right, we'll show a similar thing, or let's call it technique, with watercolor. And that'll be fun for you. Now, I often get questions about things I'm teaching in these quick tips, questions that say, will that work in oil? Well, watercolor and oil are as different as night and day. However, the way we observe things and the way we make decisions about what techniques we're going to use are the same kind of process. Now, in this case, the kind of clouds that we were addressing in the other quick tips and this person asked about are the cumulus clouds, and this is the photo I use. Now, the thing is, with watercolor, we have ways of putting color in and ways of pulling color out that can create images. And if whatever I show you now, because watercolor is such a flexible medium and has so many possibilities, there's probably at least a half dozen other ways to get the same kind of images. But I thought I have gotten other requests from time to time asking about the lift out methods. And I thought maybe let's just combine those together. And then I remember one request about how do you avoid using the masking fluids. And watercolor painters will use the masking fluids. You see here, it's kind of a little rubbery liquid that resists the paint as you put it on. But then when you rub that out, you get really, really hard edges. And a lot of people find that offensive. I'm going to show you the lift out method, and I'm going to show you about the thirsty brush. Now, just like in the quick tips I do with oil or any other medium, I'm showing you possibilities. And it's up to you to how to apply these possibilities. This is not how to do clouds. This is really how to use the lift out method for creating watercolor, creating images in watercolor. And the cumulus clouds just happen to be something we're going to refer to. And I'm going to put that out of the way because that's not that important except for where those clouds are located. So the first thing I'm going to do, first thing I always do with watercolor before beginning anything on the paper, is to pull the paint out on the palette. Now I'm going to use a blue wash that would be representing a blue sky in which we are seeing cumulus clouds. I'm going to keep this relatively simple without too much color complication. Now the blue I have that I like to use when I'm doing really large washes. I like to begin with the Antwerp blue. And so I'll pull that out right here. Now you notice I'm pulling that out deactivated, meaning that it's no longer that pasty or no longer that creamy consistency that watercolor comes in when you squirt it out of the tube. So I always like to pull it out at the darkest value possible so that I can then gauge what I do and rinse the brush really, really good. Now, the reason I don't use cerulean blue or cobalt blue is that they are opaque. They lean towards opaque, and they just don't give the depth as the Antwerp blue does. The reason I don't use ultramarine blue for washes is that it granulates. That means the pigment settles down in the little crevices that we have in watercolor paper, in the cold pressed watercolor paper. So, but Antwerp doesn't behave that way. However, Antwerp, if I want to lean Antwerp in one way or another, or if I want to take some of the green, you see, it's really a blue-green. Well, the sky is blue-green too, but skies vary in hue. And so I always like to do a little something extra. In this case, I'm going to pull out my red violet, and I'm going to just pull it right here. Just pull enough red, but not very much, because I'm not going to need much, and it's a very strong color. And what that will do to the wash is that the red violet and the green that's in the blue green, the red that's in the red violet is going to cut down or desaturate or pull back on the green that's in the blue green, making it lean a little bit more towards blue. And so you'll be able to see that now. But I'm not going to do that right now. I just like to have the color out and on the palette and ready to go. Then now that's you might call a sequence of good practices when you're painting in watercolor, so that you always have your paint ready before you begin, because the minute we put water on that paper, it's going to start drying, and the degree of wetness on the paper is part of what controls the way watercolor works. So there's the first step. And the second step is I want to put a wash. I want a wash over a larger area. And so because I want the wash on a larger area, I'll just use a spray bottle to start with. And I don't know if you can see, you see that I'm wetting pretty much the whole area with that spray bottle. That's just a shortcut. You don't have to do that. You can do it just with a brush dipped in water, but this is one way I like to do it. And now what I want is I want to start out with a surface that is uniformly wet. Really, really uniformly wet. And I want to be able to see a gloss on that surface. So I'll smooth that out. Now let's see if you can see. I don't know. I'm going to tilt it up just a little bit towards the cameras and away from the cameras, hoping that you can see that gloss. It's even all the way across. Now with watercolor, it's a good idea to tilt it up, tilt the paper up very, very slightly. And I'm going to pull the water out of the brush. And that's the thirsty brush. The thirsty brush is one that's damp, but doesn't have any significant water in it, just damp. And this thirsty brush is going to pull this water right up, just like that. That's the way I like to do that. And so I'll pull the water up, and that keeps that from being puddles of water that will run back when I start laying the wash. Now I have to move at a pace, so I'm going to wet the brush, put more water in the brush, and I'm going to begin. You see now, this is way, way lighter than I want it, so I'm going to pull gradually from the edge of my paint, pull gradually to get the value that I want it. And usually I just make it just come out a little bit darker against the palette than I think I'll want in the long run. And I'm going to touch just a little bit of that red violet to it. You see how that changes it? It just makes it a deeper blue. And that's sort of contradictory, isn't it? But that's the way it works. That's the way color affects color. All right, so I've got that really in the brush, and this is still glossy. All right, now I've talked enough that it has begun to evaporate a little too much for what I want to do. So I'm going to add a little bit of the water back in. That's what I mean. And I got to get another brush over here to pull that out, because I've got the paint in this brush. But that's what I mean. We want to always have the surface of the paper at a degree of wetness that will enable the paint to do what we want it to do. There's your first tip, and I've explained that in other tips as well. All right, here we go. Now, very quickly, I'm going to lay this wash in. I'm holding the brush at a 45-degree angle, and I'm laying that wash in. I'll go right back to the same place and pull up more paint. And I'm laying that wash in various directional strokes, you see, like this. And then it gets closer and closer to the bottom. I'm going to pull that down, get a little bit smoother than that. All right, and now as it comes closer down to the bottom, it begins to get a little lighter and a little lighter, sort of like a sky would do. And I'll put that brush aside. Now you can tilt tilt the paper back and forth like this and enable that wash, the particles of paint to move back and forth in that wetness and kind of settle down. Now you don't want to wait too long before you begin what I'm about to do. What I'm looking for now, I'm looking for that gloss to turn into a sheen. And I don't know if you can see it, but the minute that gloss turns into a sheen, then's when I go with a thirsty brush. I can do this in two different ways, and so I'm going to show you both of them. I go with thirsty brush. That means I wet the brush, I pull all the water out, and I'm going to use that thirsty brush to shape those clouds. And you see what that thirsty brush does? It just pulls that paint right out. And what I'm doing is I'm allowing my eyes to follow this edge right here. You see what I'm doing there? And then I've got to work fast now. I'm not going to be able to explain too much while I'm working. And I'll get that cloud shaped. And you see it leaves, you can control how much it leaves behind. I start again with a thirsty brush and I'll pull that a little whiter and a little whiter like this. And if you'll notice, it leaves us a nice soft edge when we do it this way. This is lifting out with a thirsty brush. One of those wonderful things that watercolor can do for us. And just by moving the brush around, I can shape the edge of that cloud. And I'm seeing the thirsty brush, go back, turn it in this direction. Now, as long as that paper stays wet enough for that paint to come up, I can continue to shape. And you see, that is, if you're in an environment where there's not a lot of air blowing, or where it's not very hot, or not, in other words, if the environment is not really, really dry, you can work a pretty good length of time doing this. Now, as the gloss begins to disappear, as that sheen begins to disappear, then the edges are going to get a little bit sharper, or they're going to hold a little bit more sharpness. And I can watch that, and I can control then with watercolor the degree of sharpness that I want those clouds to have. So if I want them to be sharper at the edges, then I will watch, and as the wash dries, I'll watch, I'll blot, rinse that brush and blot it, and then it's getting drier. It's getting drier right here. Let's say if we want this edge to be a little bit sharper right here. You see what that does? Because the wetter the edge is when you pull it out, then the softer the edge is going to be. Now I'm pulling out more down here. This is where, in here, where the paint seeped back up. One of two things. Either the brush didn't pull out enough to begin with, or the paint is seeping back up into that damp area, because that's what happens in watercolor. Paint in a damp area, if area is damp, the paint's going to seep into that area. But now I'm beginning, these edges, see these edges begin to form. And this is a kind of soft edge I like to have on a cloud. And I can get that in oil, the edge as well, in oil simply by blending. But in watercolor, we can get it by the degree of wetness that we have on the paper. And I'm watching that. That's the thing with watercolor. You have to keep an eye on that degree of wetness the whole time. Now, if I want this particular cloud, this one doesn't really show any shadow in it, but these down here do show a little bit of shadow. Now, while that's still damp, I got to be very, very careful how I do this. In fact, no, I'm going to stick with a flat brush for that. But while that's very damp, I can move in, pull just a little bit more red into that blue and make that just a little bit more desaturated. Sort of like that. I need that probably a little lighter, and we make things lighter in watercolor by adding more water. All right, so I make that wash lighter. I'm going to blot the brush to take some of the water out, and then I'm just going to drop this in right in here, like this. You see, very gently, because that's not very dark, that shadow. So if I want that shadow in there, now the degree, if I have that too wet, then the water from that would flow back into my sky and make what we call a back run, which is one of those awful things in watercolor that no watercolor painter wants to see. And you can continue this, or if you make that initial wash dark enough, you might not have to go back and get it any darker. But with this is very, very light, and so I'm not so sure we'll need to do that. But I'm going to blot the excess water off. I'm going to give it just a little bit more of a hit with that color, and then I'm going to work it around in the edges just with the point of the brush here and make that just a little bit darker. Now, if you can see right there that has dried enough, going with the round brush here to show you something else. You see there, it's dried enough that that edge wants to stay there. But if I want it to blend, I can come back with just a damp brush, not much water in it, and so let it blend. Just hold it right next to that and pull it up in, let it blend up into that area. When you're doing exercises like this, you'll discover that if you have too much water in the brush, you get backruns, and that's why I emphasize controlling the wetness and the dryness of the brush, because how dry. When I say that, I mean how much water is in the brush, according to how much paint is in the brush and how much water is down here. Now, if you want to see a background, I think I've got it wet, stay so I can show you what a background looks like. When this is too wet, I think this is too wet. There it is right there. Wonderful. That's the background. That's what happens when the paint in your brush is too wet in proportion to how wet the paper is. And it has a lacy edge, and it just gets lacier and lacier and lacier the longer it stays there. And there's no really remedy for that except just to turn it into an image like a fuzz. What's those fuzz puffball? But dandelion, those dandelion, what they call them with puffs. See, that's the kind of image. That's how you can form that kind of image with watercolor. But that's the main thing I wanted to show you. If you practice that sort of thing, I think in watercolor, as I said before, it's just the principle is like oil. You learn the technique first, learn how to make these things work for you. Then when you're painting, you ask yourself, what do I know how to do that will make that happen the way I'd like to see it happen on my painting? So I think you'll find this fun. First, it'll be a little frustrating because you're controlling that amount of water with the amount of paint, but I think you'll find it's fun. It may just make you want to do more watercolor. Be sure to view all of our quick tips. And while you're doing so, subscribe to the channel, click on the bell so you'll always get a notice when we produce a new quick tip, which is every week. And if you have a question, leave it in the comments section and we'll make a quick tip for you. Also, take a trip over to DianneMize.com where I have full-length lessons, downloads, DVDs, lots of other stuff there, some free stuff for you. And while you're there, you can subscribe to the newsletter, and that way you'll always be informed every time we do something new.